When I was young, between the ages of 2 to 10, I lived on a 7-acre ranch. We lived in a small house in front of the property. Behind it was a huge grass yard and a cabinet shop, as well as an orchard even further back full of walnut trees. My father was a carpenter that always worked in the shop, and my mother was a school teacher that was almost always busy. Their busy work life, in addition to being new parents, made it difficult for them to pay attention to me as I grew up. As such, I would often wander off, spending my days roaming around the yard, playing in the dirt and running through the walnut trees. I obviously didn't question my lack of supervision, as it was fun to explore this huge plot of land, and I just thought I was being a normal kid. When I was about 7 years old, my father surprised me with a brand new, child-sized ATV. It wasn't one of those electric ones that you're probably picturing either. It was a stupidly fast, gas-powered four-wheeler. Now, at this point, a good number of you are probably questioning why someone would give a gas-powered ATV to a 7-year-old child. But like I said, my parents were a bit reckless, and they, particularly my dad, just wanted me to have fun. Pretty much right after I got the thing, I learned how to ride it by myself, and started going farther into and past the property than I ever had before. I now had a free ride to basically as far as my young self would let me go before turning back. I started riding through the orchards, behind my house almost every day, and I loved it more than I had loved anything before. I would leave my house and be gone for hours. After a while, I gradually started roaming farther and farther away from my house as I became older and more brazen. I would ride down this dirt path that led past what I assumed was our neighbor's land and to a ditch that held water. At the time, I just liked looking at the water as it flowed, and I felt like I was a little explorer. I honestly never contemplated that what I was doing could be the least bit dangerous, and I really don't think my parents knew how far I was riding. When I think back on it now, the idea of riding a potentially dangerous piece of equipment far away from my house without my parents knowing where I was, and before cell phones existed, is pretty damn scary. I very well could have crashed or hit my head, and no one would have been able to find me. However, luckily this never happened, and it is not what this story is about. So, one day, like every other day, I was riding far away from home, and I passed a man wearing a dirty white shirt, denim jeans, and a wicker farmer's hat. I remember it vividly, as it was the first person I had seen in all the time I had been out there. I remember the surprised look in his eyes as he stared at me while I rode past him. I had no reason to stop, and my parents had always taught me about stranger danger, so I kept going and forgot about it. On the way back home, a couple hours later, I was coming up to the same spot, and it dawned on me that this is where I had seen the man. I looked ahead, not expecting him to be there, since it had been hours. Yet, as the trees parted, there he was. I didn't think it was too weird, as I figured that he was either a farmer or a homebody, so I kept driving, coming closer to where he was. The man seemed friendly, to be honest. He had a big smile on his face, like he was happy to see me. So, I waved at him as I passed by, and he waved back. I continued my way back home, not thinking much about it. I don't really remember how much time had passed between then and the next time I went riding, but it couldn't have been more than a couple of days. As usual, I took the same dirt road, past the same few orchards to the same ditch full of water. I didn't think much about my previous encounter, so I hadn't been thinking about the stranger with the big smile. I was sitting on the edge of the ditch when I heard footsteps in the dirt coming up from behind me. Again, I remember this vividly because it was not a common occurrence to see anyone on this trail. I remember being more curious than scared, and turned around to see the same stranger with a smile. This time, His smile seemed to be more of a toothy grin. He called out to me as he walked up, asking what my name was in a heavy southern drawl. I told him with confidence that I wasn't really allowed to talk to strangers, to which he said, "That's a good idea. Although, you really shouldn't be out here all by yourself. It can be dangerous for a kid your age." I remember this striking me in the gut with a little bit of a butterfly feeling. I wasn't afraid, but definitely uneasy. This piqued my curiosity, however, as I wondered what he meant, so I asked him. He continued to walk closer to me slowly and answered, "I heard they found a little boy out here, just around your age. I think it was that ditch right there where he drowned." I would like to point out here that although my parents were reckless, they were not stupid. If there had been a drowning near our house that was reported, or there had been a story in the paper, they wouldn't have let me out anymore. Anyways, he continued, "Why don't you come with me, and I'll take you back to your parents? It's not safe out here for a kid your age." I replied, It's okay, I have my quad right there. I'll just ride back." I pointed over to the side of him where my quad was, but he didn't look. His eyes remained fixed on me. They were deep brown, almost black, and piercing into me. At this point, I was scared, and I knew that this could be a bad situation. I was hoping that he was just a concerned old man, but there was no way I was going with him anywhere. I got to my feet to start walking to my quad, to which the man said, "Should a kid your age be riding something that dangerous? Let's just put it in my truck and I'll give you a ride back." "I don't see a truck," I said, looking around, hoping to talk my way out of the situation. "Oh, it's right over there on my property. You can't see it from here," he said, with a widening smile. "It's really okay. I'll just go now," I said, starting again to walk to my quad. But as I passed him, he reached and grabbed my arm. "You really shouldn't be out here," he said, staring at me deep in the eyes. "It's not safe for little kids." "Let me go! You're hurting me!" I shouted, while starting to panic. But this only made him grip tighter. "Maybe you don't deserve to go back home. I mean, what kind of parents would let their kid out here all alone? Maybe you should come home with me. I'll take care of you." At this point, I was about to pee my pants. I was freaking out, and I started to scream. I don't know if I was saying anything. I just know I was screaming as loud as I ever had before. This only seemed to anger him, as his once toothy grin turned into a face of anger. He put his hand over my face, and I took this opportunity to bite his finger as hard as I could. I still remember the taste of blood, so I know I hurt him pretty bad. Thankfully, this caught him off guard as he finally let me go. I knew this was my one chance to get away from this weirdo, so I booked it to my quad as he winced in pain. "You little shit! Get the fuck over here!" the man yelled. I knew I didn't have much time, so I jumped on my quad and turned the key as fast as I could. It started up, and just as I pulled the gas handle, I felt a hand start to grab my neck. Luckily, he didn't have a grip yet, as I was already starting to drive away. I punched it, and noped the hell out of there. At this point, all I could hear was the sound of my quad, so I wasn't sure if he was running after me. But I wasn't going to look, as I could possibly crash and be shit out of luck. I drove down that dirt path as fast as the quad would go, probably the fastest I had ever driven it. When I got home, I peeled out into the dirt and ran into the house, hoping to God my mom was home. I burst into her room bawling, and there she was. She asked me what was wrong, but I couldn't talk yet as I was so afraid. I just kept bawling. I think I cried for a good 30 minutes before I could summon up the strength to stop and tell her what happened. I remember the fear in her eyes as I described what happened. She pulled me close to her and hugged me as hard as she ever had. The next day, I talked to a police officer and recounted the story of what transpired. I honestly don't remember much after this, as I think I started to block it out. It's not really something a 10-year-old wants to think about. Needless to say, they never let me off the property again. My dad started drinking, and we lost the house soon after this anyways, so I didn't have to live there much longer. Recently, I was thinking about that day after I started trying to remember various parts of my childhood. My parents had never told me what happened after the cops were called, and I had never really asked because I tried not to think about it. I eventually went to my mom's house and asked her if they ever found the guy, considering he had to live close to our property. She was startled by the question, because we hadn't talked about this in 15 years. She paused for a minute, as if pondering whether to tell me, and said, "We didn't have any neighbors out that way. It was all corporate-owned land, and the description you gave didn't match any of the neighbors in the other direction. We called the cops, and they went to search where you told us you were, but the guy was long gone by the time they got there. They looked around the property and found an abandoned house that hadn't been used in years since the land was purchased. When they looked inside, they could tell that he had been staying there. Apparently, he left his stuff behind. We never told you this because you were way too young, but one of the things they found was a black grocery bag. It had a roll of duct tape and a hunting knife inside." "Oh. Thanks, Mom. But did I really need to know that?"